Welcome everybody to the Watershed Education Center. We have a number of folks in the audience, and we have an even more present audience virtually, so we thank everybody for coming. Our presenter today is Bob Stryker from Livingston County Soil and Water Conservation District. He's going to be talking about conservation best management practices. Before we get started with Bob, and a little housekeeping, we have a restroom to the side. It's unisex. We have 3 exits for everybody, this massive crowd to go out in case we need to go out for coffee after. And with our program coming up, I just want to take a second to promote a couple of our other programs in the Watershed Education Center. This is a state-of-the-art facility, one of the only kind in this region. Of course, I closed out my PowerPoint. In addition to the best management practices this evening, we're going to be hosting the total solar eclipse with the Rochester Museum and Science Center in March. In April, we have the Livonia High School students, and we packed the house with that. And then in May, we've got a rain barrel make and take. So you can see we have a number of programs coming up, and we've got a stellar program layout for 2024. So we're hoping other folks join us as we unfold a really fabulous year. So I will turn it over to Bob, and he will entertain us with his power-packed PowerPoint.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Stryker, and I work for the Livingston County Soil and Water Conservation District. Okay, my contact information, I'll have this at the end too, so folks, you'll have an opportunity to go through this. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. If you have questions, but okay. So tonight's presentation is going to be around the theme of conservation practices or best management practices that we've installed over the past 10 years across the within the watershed, and we'll jump around the watershed and we'll look at key BMPs. Okay. So before we start, there's a very brief video. It really explains exactly what a watershed is and how it impacts everyone, not just someone right next to the lake shore, someone above the lake shore. It could be anyone. So the video was put on about several years ago from the Missouri-Mississippi Conservation Development Corp, but it does a really good job of explaining exactly what a watershed is. So,
wherever you live on this earth, you live in a watershed. A watershed is a drainage basin, any area of the earth draining into a particular pond, river, or lake. The watershed of this pond, for instance, is the entire area of the earth that drains to the pond. The watershed of the pond and neighboring watersheds combine to form a larger watershed for this creek. The creek may then be part of a watershed of a small lake. It combines with other watersheds to make up the watershed of a larger river. That larger river feeds into an even larger river that has an even larger system of sub-watersheds. And finally, the ever-expanding system of watersheds becomes one huge watershed that empties into the ocean. But why should you care? From farms to small towns to cities, people's lives are connected by falling rain and flowing water, and where it goes. How you care for your land affects how much and how fast water flows to your neighbors downstream, and how clean that water is. And the way your upstream watershed neighbors care for their land affects you in the same way. For instance, if people upstream from you build houses, streets, and parking lots on the land that drains to your stream, you can expect more water to run off and at a faster pace, and your land is more likely to be flooded. Or upstream landowners who don't protect against soil erosion not only lose their soil, they dump sediment, nutrients, and other pollutants that affect everyone downstream. Without proper conservation, there are downstream consequences such as flooding, stream bank erosion, sediment-clogged lakes, and pollutants in drinking water. But those problems can be minimized if each of us does our part to hold the rain in place where it falls. We can help water soak into the soil by planting grasses, tilling the land less, using rain gardens, being careful of how much fertilizer we use, and doing many other things. But we each need to do our part. After all, we are all truly connected in a watershed, and we depend on one another to be a good neighbor.
All right, so from that perspective, everyone's in a watershed. So now I want to, and what we're going to do this evening is we're going to focus in more and more, drill down onto an area to try and address the concerns in that, within that sub watershed. Okay. So before we do that, the key steps to getting conservation practices on the ground. These are the main ones that I've learned over my career. You want to be able to delineate the watershed. Think of that as the playing field. In other words, we've got to understand what is draining to this area. And then secondly, we need to identify all the likely players, landowners and infrastructure in particular. Okay, whether it's a landowner, a municipality, and then what type of infrastructure is there. And then the next would be the natural features. You want to use those to your strengths, your topography, your soil. What are the current land uses? And then always in the back of your mind, think small, less is always more. And we want to be able to shorten slope lengths whenever possible. Keep it as simple as you can and do those three things. Okay, next slide. Couple of things I wanted to point out here. Erosion reveals the wrong places to start. So when you see erosion such as this, that is not where the solution is going to take place. In other words, you might be, if you see these straw bales, these were placed there in an attempt to address the erosion that was taking place. Basically, that's like taking an aspirin to try and do away with a hangover and thinking that, well, I can always drink as long as I take an aspirin afterwards. The damage is done, and then you're dealing with it afterwards. So the other thing I wanted to point out in this slide is the different kinds of erosion. This is a good depiction of real erosion, which are small gullies, like if you drag your fingers through sugar. And then there's gully erosion, where it's actually has some depth to it, where you know, it's getting to be 9-12 inches or sometimes feet deep. And then there's also sheet erosion taking place. That's more difficult to see. It's like a sheet of paper where it just uniformly just gets transported. And then finally, in front of the straw bales, you see deposition. That's the natural process of soils dropping out of water when the velocity gets changed. But then you'll see it take right off on both sides of the straw bale and start eroding again. So up in the top corner, another key point is more than one best management practice or an actual system is often required. So some type of a best management system is going to be implemented. So that leads into a real simple definition that we follow when we're implementing best management practices. For structural practices, which I'm going to be showing you shortly, the definition would be the construction of a control system to control the loss of sheet, ephemeral, rill, gully erosion. Okay, and you're going to see there's several different practices that we typically utilize. So there's a good definition. Okay. Practices that we usually use on agricultural land, and they're very similar to what we would use on non-agricultural land. They just have different names. The one that we, as a soil and water conservation district employee, we would rely on primarily is generated through the New York State Ag and Markets. It's often updated over the years to make improvements, and that's provided here. So we've got a big toolbox to use, and we're gonna need all those tools. Okay, this is just a listing of some of those names, and I apologize if I get into acronyms, I try not to, but the top one there is water and sediment control basins. Other typical practices would be grass waterways, lined waterways, which you'll see coming up, terraces, conservation cover, and also cover crops, and then obstruction removal. And then I've highlighted this next one, underground outlets. They're a key component for almost all structural practices that we implement, because they are able to do two things for us. Okay, and I'll get to that. It's going to be address runoff and run on and get the water in low flow to an outlet safely. Okay, backing up just the whisker. When we do practices, we always talk about storms, or you'll hear, wow, that was a 50-year storm, or that was a 100-year storm. I put up this graph just to give you an appreciation of what they mean by storms and what that would mean for a practice and how things get sized. For the practices listed that I just listed, most are the standard is set to be built to a 10-year storm event. And when you look here, a 10-year storm event would be the lowest curve here. So you can see the lowest bell shape here. This cursor works. Guess it doesn't work on there. So if you can see the lowest curve, and then the next green for the 25, blue would be 50, and then the brown is the 100-year storm. Putting that in rainfall, we look at it in a 24-hour time period. The 10-year storm is about 3.2 inches of rain, all the way up to 4.75 inches for a 100-year storm. So you can, if that gives you an appreciation for the sizing of things. Again, practices are built to a minimum of a 10-year storm. A lot of the ones that I'll show you this evening, due to proper placement within the watershed and working with the landscape, some exceed the 100-year storm size. Okay, so getting back to that underground outlet that I pointed out, when we talk underground outlets, we're talking drainage tubing. Okay, it comes in various sizes, 4-inch up to, you can get 5 foot. But typically, we try to minimize the size and get storage on the ground. But this is typically what we would have on a project. And then also that underground outlet needs a stable outlet to flow to. And that's for the low flows from structures that we're going to construct upstream. So this is the outfall of a structure that's upstream. And so that's looking up gradient, and then looking down gradient, that would be our outfall. And the rock is provided there to knock off energy so that the outlet won't erode itself. So, okay. I also mentioned the other importance of underground outlets, and a lot of times we don't really think of this, but it's key, is to address run on. In other words, when we're trying to implement practices, or we have an opportunity to work with landowners to implement practices, where we are located within the watershed is limited often. We can't get as far up into the watershed and start construction as we would like, and that could be for various reasons. There's restrictions, infrastructure, there's non-willing participants, or the land use just doesn't fit it. So this is a good shot, a real example. This was on Long Point of a practice that we installed a series of water and sediment control basins, where we had first, during the construction, we had to identify and address run on to the property. So this is after a large storm event. I think it was like a 25-year storm event in the middle of the summer about 5 years ago, where we got a big thunderstorm and it dropped a few inches of rain. And this is the run on that we intercepted prior to it getting onto our footprint of watershed. And we were able to protect the structures that we built. And that's just another picture of that shot there. So these smallmouth bass were located in a farm pond up above in the watershed. And the intensity of the storm was significant enough to where the pond overflowed and all the fish went out. And unfortunately, we intercepted them at our basin. Okay, so there's lots of tools, and oftentimes it takes more than one tool to successfully and long-term protect the longevity of a practice that we install. And I put this photo in here generically to give you a visual of what I mean by a combination of best management practices. Oftentimes these are going to be present, or they'll be present in the next year's rotation of crops. What we have here is a basin that was constructed, a shallow basin that's intercepting rainwater or runoff. And then we also have strip cropping, where there's separate crops growing at separate stages. That helps shorten the slope length and minimize erosion and the transfer of sediment off downstream or off transport to another portion of the field. So. Okay. So now let's get into some actual projects and drill down on the watersheds. Okay. So first best management practice that I wanted to point out is on the Cicero Farm, South Lima Road, Route 15. And this is what is called, this is a rock lined outlet. Okay, it's similar to a grassed waterway, but it requires that rock armoring be installed because the watershed above is at a size to where if we just tried to establish permanent sod, the velocity of the water during a typical 5 or 10 year storm would wash the channel out and erosion would take place. So this is during construction. You can see the drainage way has been excavated, rock lined, and seeded mulched on both sides. And just, okay, this slide should have come first, but so this is where we're located. When we're actually located in two sub-watersheds, the Densmore and the Wilkins Creek at the point of the arrow, in front of the point of the arrow. This is a break in the watershed. This is ideal from the standpoint of being as high up in one watershed as you can, so you have the smallest acreage to deal with. Okay. And this is establishment of that rock lined outlet. Okay, and you can see that the grass seeding is taking place. This is looking downslope towards Route 15, and then looking upslope. So now we're looking upslope, and we've staged this practice. So now we're able to go and do additional upstream practices because we now have a stable outlet. So that's key. You want to do things in sequence that make sense. We don't want to build we can't build the top of a skyscraper until we have a firm foundation. That's kind of the way I want to think is we have a stable outlet, fully stable. Now we can begin construction further upstream with things like terraces and wascops. And I'll go over those in greater detail, but just to give you a sense on this particular project, what that would look like. This was a large 900-foot terrace basin that was installed the following year after the stable outlet, and then crops were planted shortly after. And then there'll be more photos if this doesn't quite make sense to you, but think of this as a very, very large, long basin that can contain and trap water, slow it down before it erodes. Okay. So next we're going to move over to the northwest side of the watershed, the Conesus Lake Watershed, into what's referred to as Hannah's Creek sub-watershed. And if you were to look at an aerial and break that particular watershed out, this is what it would look like. So when we look at this, we can see a couple of things. We can see it's approximately 1,700 plus or minus acres of drainage way that naturally flows to the north to the outlet portion of the lake. And then you can also see on here that it's not a highly intensely developed watershed. And there's probably, I didn't count them all, but there's probably only, say, 30 individual tax parcels. What we're going to focus in is on the upper right-hand side, two particular tax parcels. If my pointer was working, or I had a pointer, I could point to it. But we'll be looking at these particular two tax parcels right in here, this area here. And the participants were Deer Run Winery and Dairy Knoll Farms. These two particular landowners, farm operations, cooperated together so that we could address approximately 50 acres of drainage that they couldn't control coming onto the highest property, and then the additional acreage of the watershed between the two of about 100 or about 70 acres. So this is a snapshot of that and where our practices are going to be located. The practices are within the red ovals. So in the southern portion, we have our first basin, and then there's a series of 4 additional basins. Okay, so that gives you an idea of where we want to implement things. When we actually go out into the field and we start evaluating the conditions, this would be just to the north of the property, the property line between the two parcels. And remember what I said earlier on in the presentation, erosion tells you where not to start. So we know, because of the concentrated flow starting, that if we're going to be successful in slowing down the water coming from above, we need to get further up into the watershed. So here we are, about 300 feet to the south, and where the pickup truck is parked is where the property line is. And this appears to be this area where it's heavily saturated. There's a significant amount of road runoff that congregates and stops at this location. And then this would be our starting point from the standpoint of land use. You can see that we have a residential building not too far above, so we know we can't continue on up with any type of large containment because there's physically a house there. This is also, I wanted to point out, this is exactly where the two tax parcels are, and it involves 2 landowners. This is back in 2017, prior conditions. So we're thinking establishment of storage. We know we need storage. Okay, and this is a typical picture of what that storage looks like. And this is actual equipment at that location. Typically dozers are utilized to save, to scrape off and to save all the topsoil. That is the whole purpose of driving the value and the concerns. So we're going to save all that. And then the other thing is we're going to, as best we can, try and change the way that we farm. We're going to try and farm with or on the contour, and that allows us to establish structures. And actually the red arrow on the slide depicts where one of the structures has been installed. Okay, this is where the initial structure went in, where the truck was parked next to the road and there was a hedgerow. That hedgerow was doing more damage than good as where it was located, plus it was in the location where we needed the structure. So this is what a typical structure would look like. This is what's called a grass-lined water and sediment control basin. If you travel on West Lake Road, you could readily see this. And then shortly after, that was in October of 2013. Okay, so we've done one structure. We've completed one of the 5 structures. Shortly afterwards, winter comes. Our grass hasn't started really grabbing yet, but you can see that the structure is functioning. It's doing what we want it to do. Okay, and this is just a close-up. This is a significant snow melt and rain event. You can see the mulch is helping minimize the erosion, and the structure is slowing down the water, letting it go slowly through the underground outlet, which there's an orange standpipe there where it goes down through. Then we get into, that was in February of 14. Then we're moving into July of, or 13 it should be. That would be 13, I apologize, yeah, February, that's right, yeah, and then now we're into July of 14. Okay, this initial hot furthest up basin continues to get a workout, okay? Here you can see it's receiving, the grass has grown well. However, we do have some concerns with some erosion on the inlet side. So we have addressed that. We've rock lined what is coming off of the roadway in the watershed above. And this is moving 3 years ahead. The basin is still functioning well. We've stabilized our structure and it's receiving big storm events. And that's just another picture of the initial one. You can see it safely receiving the water and slowing things down. The grass basin is functioning. And the next slide will be in the field itself where there's a large footprint. There's approximately 70 acres. You can see the series of 4 structures beginning to slow the water down. Actually, the straw bales that are floating there are from the inlets. These basins were just completed and it was a very wet year. And you can see the basins taking hold and doing their job. So you can see 3 of the 4. You can't quite see the 4th one in the picture here. Okay, so that was Hannah's Creek. I want to just move a little bit to the north to what is called the North End subwatershed. And we'll take a look at that from the standpoint of an aerial with the tax parcels on it. You'll see that on the northern end and the southern end of the watershed, it's heavily developed. And then you're going to see alongside the road corridors, it's heavily developed. And then you'll see a large areas of agricultural land. This watershed's smaller. It's about 1/3 the size of Hannah's Creek. And it provides an opportunity to work furthest up the watershed, much further up the watershed than Hannah's Creek did. You can see we're all the way at the beginning. In other words, we're at the top of the mountain where the raindrop fell. Okay, so this is a drone image taken in this past January, and this was courtesy of working with Mark Grove from the Department of Health. We went out with this drone. Actually, if you look in the upper right middle corner, you can see our truck. We're parked and we're sitting in there chatting, and he's up there flying with the drone. We're taking these aerials. So we're sitting here in the pickup truck, and we're giving you a perspective of this subwatershed. So this is looking south, and what you won't notice is this is what I would refer to as the Coe farm. Joanne Coe owns the farm, and she worked with the district to implement several practices, and I'll go through those next. Okay, so the practices were three acres of field stream buffers, and then 2 large water and sediment control basins. The buffers, if you look along the wooded area there, there's now been established a 40-foot wide, it's a little bit over 3,000 foot in length of field and stream border that allows a couple of things. It stabilizes the outlets stabilizes the cover over our underground outlets for our structures, which are high above to the left. And then it also provides a means for access to remove obstructions over time so that things can be maintained in the drainage way. So zooming in the upper portion of those farm fields, The area that's discolored is the area that where no farming crop was planted or it was destroyed during our construction this summer. They've, the reality of getting construction done, we need to build when we can. So that, the landowner farmer forfeits that area often just so we can get the benefits of the structures built. So here we have one of the initial basins. And that basin, to give you a perspective, it's about 120 feet wide of disturbance by about 400 feet in length. And then if we were to look and turn directly a 180 and look straight north, we're looking straight south or now, we look straight north. Beneath us is another much larger basin that's about 900 foot in length with the same width, about 120 of disturbed area. These areas will be able to be recouped back into crop production next year. Actually, they're planted to winter wheat now. Everything's been reestablished. So the other thing I want to point out with this, where the hedgerow is located, that is now the beginning of an additional farm that the district worked with this summer. Similar practices, a series of 4 water and sediment control basins on the land that is between the 2 hedgerows, okay? And then the stream border carries along the hedgerow that runs, it would be east and west. Because up into the wooded area that's just off to the side here is a large wetland complex that continually was causing erosion through seepage coming onto the farmland. So we've got that stabilized. This is just a up close picture of the construction on the Les Cole farm of water and sediment control structures. And then if you were to look on the other side of the field to the south, that is the Joanne Coe farm. This is looking back at the close-up of the basins. In particular, the contractor that did this project utilized bulldozers and a pan to move the earth to grade these large basins. That is an overall aerial that was taken in January of those basins. They might be difficult to see, but if you look for lighter areas, there's a series of 4. In this whole area here, there's a long section, about 1,600 foot in length, both combined, staggered so that they intercept the water coming off the hillside before it heads to the south. Okay. That was a picture I showed you earlier. Again, a lot of times these practices will have additional BMPs implemented rather right away or in the crop rotation. And that would be what they would look like. You'd see a large basin with alternating crops on either side, oftentimes. The other tool in the toolbox that I mentioned on the Coe project was just a close-up of what a typical stream field border would look like. It's typically permanent sod or grass, and it's typically anywhere from 20 to 40 feet, depending on the slope of the land. And then in this particular picture, this field border is protecting the stream, which is just within the wooded area. About 20 feet within is the active stream traveling. Okay. All right, next we're gonna move slightly to the south. We're gonna jump over Wilkins Creek sub-watershed. We're gonna go to the North End Creeks watershed. And again, an aerial. This is the road below is Van Zant Road, and this is Barbara Van Zant's farmstead. And what we're looking at is what's called a terrace diversion. A terrace diversion is when you work from field edge to field edge and you're on the contour. So it's from field edge to field edge, whereas a basin, a water and sediment control basin that I previously showed you, might just be located within the field. It doesn't go entirely the entire length. This would be a terrace structure. And the idea is to travel the entire contour and then also create a storage structure that can intercept the entire length of the slope across the field. So that's the perspective of it. And then just above it, you'll see a pond, which actually we did a few years earlier. That is the spring, as a rather significant spring that runs 24/7 year round. That we updated and addressed prior to installing the terrace because of the drainage and this seepage concerns that we would have to deal with otherwise. So this is kind of like doing BMPs in series logically so that the one downstream can be fully successful. And then, so that's looking directly west from above. And this would just be the other perspective, looking southwest. And so what happens is this terrace diversion you'll be able to farm the entire thing. But when we get in excess of a 10-year storm, that this was built to, and it's actually slightly over that. If we get a 100-year storm or a 500-year storm, the water, instead of it running straight down and going right to the road ditch where the wooded area ends at the road, it will be forced to travel the length all the way to the north and slowly in sheet flow re-enter the stream corridor, which is this wooded area all along here, all the way around here. And again, there is an underground outlet taking low flows. There's two standpipes in this terrace diversion structure, about a third of the way in on both sides, and they slowly release the water safely down into the stream. Okay. Just a little reminder for me to drive home the point. We have tools. We have lots of tools, and we want to use all those tools. We don't want to just use one. We want to be able to use them all because in combination, they ensure the longevity and the performance of the practices that we're installing. So what we've been seeing mostly are, or what we've seen up to date are structural type of practices. So now I just wanted to point out here we have a couple of tools, agronomic tools. We have alternating strips of crops. And this in particular, the forefront is clover that was frost seeded into winter wheat. So we have alternating harvest times, and we have a continual coverage on the fields. That is one tool that is utilized routinely, not just in the watershed, but across the whole county in agriculture. So the other thing I wanted to point out, just more types of cover crops. These are particular ones that we work with farms, and they're dated back. This one for triticale, I wanted to just show different varieties. So there's triticale, which is a hybrid of wheat and rye. And then we just have also winter wheat planted after harvest there. So, okay, so that was the Northeast Creeks. We're moving around. When I put this presentation together and I got it all together and I ran through it a couple of times for the presentation, and I go, yeah, I guess we did get around. We didn't just stay on one side, or so I'm actually happy that I was able to show you numerous locations within the watershed that we've been able to get practices installed. So next we're going to move to the Webb farm, Bob Webb's farm. That's in Densmore sub-watershed, and it's highlighted with the arrow here. Okay, so I put up we've worked with Mr. Webb over the past 9 years, implementing best management practices. This is an actual aerial from 1920 or from 2022. And I've highlighted a series of structures, and then I also point out alongside the southern portion of his farm, we've installed 2,000 foot of a grass field border, stream border. So I'm going to run through these with you. So The stream runs alongside naturally, and the watershed is much larger. It runs alongside the southern portion of his property. And then this was back in 2022, February. We had a very significant storm event. I apologize, I don't remember what size it was, but it was definitely more than a 25. And this was impact caused by obstruction within the corridor. It didn't have anything to do with the actual farm itself. It was more of the watershed above and obstruction over time accumulating. And so I wanted to point out some of the practices that we utilize are obstruction removal and establishment of a border. That border helps let the stream naturally breach its banks instead of it backing up and then cutting and eroding a new channel elsewhere. It also allows for access over time to remove accumulation before it becomes an issue. Okay, so when we began work on the web farm, we first started with a series of 2 smaller water and sediment control basins. And actually, this is a photo of how those basins were constructed. Again, we strip off all the topsoil. You can see it pushed to the sides, off to the sides about 40 feet out of the way. And then typically with a dozer, grading and shaping is established and an underground outlet is installed to collect and carry away the water at a slow rate. And that's what the basin looks like. Once it's all reshaped, you can see the topsoil has all been replaced onto the structure. You can see it's actually starting to work. There's actually seepage coming up through, and it's starting to head towards the far end where there's a riser. So that's the initial smaller water and sediment control basins. And after accomplishing those, what we were able to do is in 2023 or in 2022, we installed a large terrace system from field edge to field edge, and it'll show clearly in the next photo. But that made it possible to follow the entire contour. And this next picture will show that, or I can point it out. In the upper portion, you'll see a long 1,600 foot long terrace. It's right here, cuts across. You can see that is pretty much right on the same elevation. So as farm equipment works back and forth, it's now basically you're perpendicular to the contour, which minimizes soil loss. And it also helps in retaining water during the summer months when we get rains. So you'll also notice the initial basins that I first showed you, they've been left in sod, so they don't look like they're farmed. There's one directly there, and then up above in the area that's not farmed, there's a basin there. So again, those are water and sediment control basins, and then there's the terrace structure itself that went field edge to field edge. Now, if we look, that's just another picture of it, shows better the terrace. It has some water in it so you can see it better. And, oops. Okay, now I just wanted to look to the west because down below that, you'll see there's a pond. And then you can also see our basins, the sodded basins, the 2 there. You can see my pickup truck where Mark and I are sitting as he flies the drone below the first basin. We're actually sitting on the ridge of the first basin that I showed where the bulldozer was. Okay. Then you'll also see alongside the stream to the far left, that area is not disturbed. There's a significant portion that's been established and graded so that when the stream does become a torrent from upstream, it has a means, the stream has a means to relieve itself, and then also that obstruction can be readily removed. And when I say obstruction, it's typically fallen trees. Every once in a while there's a tire, but most of those have been out over time, but it's typically woody vegetation that's removed. Okay, I want to zoom in on the pond now. The pond is more than just a pond. And when you look at the pond here, this was constructed a few years ago. We did utilize some cost share assistance through the Conesus Lake Watershed program. And we were able to install this stormwater detention basin above the pond. The pond itself was constructed because we needed earthen material to create the large temporary storage area to alleviate runoff coming, runoff impacting the point, is that Cottage Point? And then all the houses down below, Orchard Point, I'm sorry, Orchard Point. So if you look at that, you can see the pond itself, and it's like a large salad bowl. So there's depth to it. And then if we zoom in, there's also a series of 3 controlled outlets. Number 1 is really just a low flow, what we call trickle flow. It's a 4-inch PVC pipe that basically year round runs a very low flow and keeps the pond at an elevation. Number 2 is a larger 12-inch standpipe that during the normal 25-year storm event, it will start working because the area above the pond is filling up. And number 3 is the emergency spillway. And that exceeds the 100-year storm where it's just natural grading. So where if we get to that point, the overflow will go as a sheet flow. And you'll just see it cascade down. When we get to that point, it'd be a very significant storm. So we're retaining over 2 acres in surface. So this is 3/4 of an acre, the water itself right now. When this ever exceeds the 100-year storm, you would have to more than triple that size because it's about 2 1/4, about 2 1/4. So you envision that water area being that big around. So, okay, this is just a picture of in a normal growing season of what the pond looks like. And we're looking uphill up to where we built the terraces, up gradient. The terraces outlet into this pond, safely discharged to a stable outlet. So, and also the smaller water and sediment control basins, they also safely discharge into this pond. That's just another image that kind of shows the depth that this reserve can establish. And then that's just a close-up of the primary overflow, not the low flow, but the primary overflow that kicks in when we get the 25-year storm or larger. Okay. One more project I wanted to go through. I know this is, I don't want to leave you with the thought that these practices can only take place on agricultural land. That's simply not the case. Most of these practices are, it doesn't matter if it's ag land or however, if you have the footprint for them, you can install them. I wanted to go over a project that we did with a municipality and landowner. And this would be in the Sandpoint subwatershed. So we would jump right across the street from Densmore. And actually, if you're at Densmore on the web farm, you can see this project crystal clear. And that would be on the McClellan farm. I'm sorry, McClellan Farm, Reservoir Road, south side. This project is very visible from the road. This is prior conditions, and this is the location. This was back in January 12th of 2018. And it's the location of a grass detention basin or water and sediment control basin, but it's really acting as a detention basin. And this would be, okay. So this is where the basin went in. This was in September of 2018. The landowner, McClellan Farm, and then also the Geneseo Highway Department. We installed this just over an acre. It's about 1.1 acre detention basin, and that's been straw mulched. And then this just gives you a perspective of how close that basin is to the lake. This is just standing on top of one of the topsoil piles and taking a picture. The excavator sits there, and then you can see the topography drops off fastly or very quickly, and then you can see the lake. So this is just that mulching close up, and again of the lake, you can see and how the ground or the topography drops off fast, mulching establishment. And then shortly after in June, you can see the grass seed growing and the basin getting a workout. The orange riser with the orange top, or the orange standpipe with the yellow top, that's a trash rack for it. That's the primary outlet for the basin. It also has pattern drainage beneath it so that it's easy to maintain, so that when it is mowed, it doesn't get rutted up. So what you can see, it's working here. And then this is just a close-up in June of 2019. You can see the water's filling in the basin and it's going out the outlet. And this is just a shot of that outlet. You can see the water flowing out. It's an 8-inch main that discharges the water to the road ditch where it was already occurring, but now it's in a controlled condition. The road used to routinely wash out the side of the road. So we have our basin installed, and actually just the way things worked out, now we're into August of 2019. We need to rock armor that very steep portion of the road to assure that the road won't be washed out by the water that's coming down there. We've slowed the water greatly down, but we still haven't addressed the amount of water and the velocity that occurs due to that topography. So this is rock armoring of that road ditch to minimize or stop that from occurring. And this is just placement of the large stone. And this is looking back after it's completed. This was through a funding opportunity through the non-ag funding source, through the DEC, through the Water Quality Incentive Program that is available. So that's why the signage is there. And then this next photo will show this rock line road ditch that used to wash out routinely in the culverts that were there, getting a workout shortly after. So there's that. Okay, so I've got through the slides. I don't know if that was fast or not, but or too fast. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. That's my contact information. And thank you.
Any questions online, Don? Can you tell?
I got a question or two.
Sure.
Thank you, by the way. It's a very good presentation. I live right next to the web project, so I got to see that happen. Interesting to watch once I figured out what it was. So just in your last photo there, we talked about the rocks and the ditches on the road. And is it a general rule that basically the steeper the slope, the bigger the rock? You're trying to control the rate of water. Is there an ideal rate that you shoot for?
Well, the size of the rock is driven by the energy that's coming. So, yeah, so usually it's a combination of check dams to installation of check dams, which are made out of rock that make it not as steep because you're stepping things. So it's instead of it being like this, you're making steps. So it can't be as steep because you're slowing it down. So to answer your question, the slope does drive the size of the rock along with what is coming there. Yes. In other words, how much is coming there? Yeah.
And then sort of related, obviously we're dealing with earth, right? So you can't necessarily control what flows into the water. That might over time, say, block up a certain portion of your flow.
Mm-hmm.
Are there ways, do you occasionally monitor the water flow to see if it's going out at the predicted rate, or how do you know 5 years later that everything is still good?
Well, there's maintenance. There definitely is maintenance, and that's key. I mean, over time, things fill in. Water and sediment control basins are just that. They accumulate sediment. So they're built to a standard and we know over time that they're gonna fill in. So to get into answer your question, maintenance is key. If you're not maintaining it, if 10 years goes by and it's only half as full now, in other words, the volume it can hold is only half, it's only working at half its capability. And then also, more urgently is after big storm events, things like crop residue or trash, especially alongside highway roads, trash gets over the inlet or the out, somehow blocks the outlets. Yeah, so, does the district, myself personally, do that? The district isn't regulatory, although we have a good relationship with landowners and, that we try to, hey, geez, and if it's near the road, it's not uncommon for me just to stop, put the four ways on and clear off the grate. And it's just like, it's a minute of my time, so.
So you kind of end up falling into the see something, say something scenario to kind of keep up with.
Yeah.
At least some of the projects over time.
Right, and there is an expectation, I mean, technically, it's only got a 10-year lifespan, so, it ran its life, I'm not gonna maintain it anymore. I mean, it's like anything, I mean, I'd wear a shoe forever if it didn't get a hole in it, so.
We had a question. Can you please put your contact information back up?
Yep. And
You all can see that. And from Sharon, that was really interesting.
thank you.
We saw your soil conservation signs at Van Zandt a while back and was wondering what was going on. Great job. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Hi, I'm Gene Bolster. I'm with the CLA Watershed Education Center Committee. And I'd like to present this certificate of thank you to Bob for his presentation tonight. I would also like to mention that I asked Bob before the presentation tonight, how much time do you spend on preparing the presentation? He didn't give me an answer. He said, I don't do it all at once. I do it over a period of time. He says, I probably don't want to know.
92 slides.
And the reason I mention it, it's just not Bob, but there are several presentations, usually one a month, by speakers like Bob that donate their time to give us these presentations. So I think the community in general should really appreciate and understand the work that's done by people like Bob. Thank you very much.